to our first episode in MHT Up Close, where we take a look at the comings and goings and things that are happening here at the seminary, which, as Excellency always says, is very boring, but I beg to differ. It's quite a fascinating life here. And Father Dutertre gave a spiritual conference last week, and he mentioned something that I talked to His Excellency about that I found fascinating, which is, what is it that a priest receives when he finishes 7 years of seminary? And Father was talking about his realization of how much he didn't know, in a sense. And I shared a quote from Marcelo Glazer, who's a Brazilian physicist, that as the island of my knowledge grows, so does the shore of my ignorance. And a priest, at once he has gone through 7 years of training and he exits the seminary, he probably has a good apprehension of just how much he doesn't know, even though he has learned so much.
Yes, I say that to the seminarians when they come in, that the seminary is a success if, when you have completed your 7 years of seminary training, which is intense and very academic, you realize how much you don't know and not how much you know. The more you study sacred theology, church history, all the subjects that they take, you realize that there is a vast world that you're entering that you do not know. You're just peeking in the door. For example, we have in our library about 15,000 books, mostly theology and all these subjects, church history and philosophy, etc. That is a tiny seminary library. Tiny. Yet, if you were to read all of those books, it would take you many, many years, if not a lifetime. The fathers, all the theologians, going through all of them, absorbing them. You just look around in our library and say, there's so much I don't know. It's all of this, and we are the beneficiaries of many centuries of theology and of the work of many, many very bright people who have been writing about all of the aspects of the Catholic Church, spirituality, great saints, and they have been very prolific. Their works take up many volumes, like St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure, all of these great doctors of the Church. It's just vast, and it's very humiliating. So I tell them that so that they don't think that, well, I've been here for 7 years, now I'm an expert. No, you know the fundamentals, and you're well educated, but there's an awful lot you don't know.
Well, I think it's interesting. We talked about this at table, and Father Esposito brought up the idea of this humbling that goes on, that a first-year seminarian, let's say, talks a lot at table because he knows everything, and then a second year, maybe he knows a little less. By the time you're a third-year seminarian, you've caught the proper amount of speaking at table, and it's similar to out in the world. An 18-year-old knows everything. By the end of his 20s, he may realize, his parents know a few things, and by the end of his 30s, he realizes his parents know everything. He didn't know anything.
Well, they learned a lot over those years.
Right. Right. And so that process happens at the seminary too, and I think we as lay people, we underestimate that process, that molding process that has to go on here. And part of that is the humility of realizing what surrounds you, and as you illustrated it by the library, but that's one aspect. The pastoral aspect as well. One thing that we talked about before we started recording is you were not prepared for how much marriage counseling you would have to be involved in, and the amount of it that lands on your plate.
Yeah, and the complexity of it. That is one of the most difficult things to do for a priest, is to counsel people that are having trouble in marriage, and there's quite a few people that have trouble in marriage. And it's something you have to go back to the books, and also you have to use a great deal of prudence and judgment concerning those things. So, the experience of the priesthood drives you back to the books. And so a priest should always have a library, perhaps not 15,000 books, but enough to be able to solve their problems. Now, another problem in our situation is that we have to face these various theological demands or canonical demands that are placed before us by the situation in the church, which is unprecedented. So you can't look up what to do in the case where there's no pope since 1958, where there's no bishops around. There's nothing that will tell you what to do with regard to that. So you have to be very careful about all of the conclusions that you draw, and you have to do a great deal of research. So that, again, drives you to the books. Also, you have to have a caution. You can't just read one book and decide, well, this is it. I'm totally informed. You have to research something very, very deeply because there are many aspects to the various problems that come up today.
Well, this is something Father Cicada told me on very, very early on was you could just call the chancery office, I have a problem, and they have a whole staff of people who would look that up for you. And so sometimes parents may complain and say, oh, we don't have the access to the regular things. It's a lot of do-it-yourself, DIY. And they have to realize the priests are in the same situation. They don't have access to the same resources that we used to have access to. So you have to spend a lot of time looking up these important questions.
Yes, and questions that don't necessarily have easy answers, where you have to use some judgment as to how to apply it to the present problem. And so that is difficult.
Something else that he talked about is part of the formation and a caution to seminarians, but I realize the advice applies to all of us as well, which is be careful trusting your memory. It's important to make sure that if you see something important, write it down. These days we can take a photo with our phone, make a note, because if you trust your memory, you're gonna face the consequences.
Yes, many, many, many times I have read something and did not write it down, and then I cannot remember where I saw it, and no matter how hard I look. Many times, that's true. Yes.
So it's not just good advice for future priests. I think it's very good advice for laymen. And that's, I'm mentioning all of this is within just one moment in a spiritual conference in which the seminarians hear. And this is something else I realized while watching this, Your Excellency. There's a method to this that they're hearing from different priests who have different personalities on different subjects. So if they were just to sit down and just listen to the rector every week on the same subject, it's easier to, let's say, tune out, even, let's say, if it's Bishop Sanborn. But by hearing...
Well, they better not.
they are so warned. But by varying the priests who have different personalities and by varying the subject matter, they're much more able to take in those various messages.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
Well, thank you for appearing on this first episode, Your Excellency, and we'll have many more in the future.
Thank you.